Rain tapped against the hospital window like it was trying to whisper something only she could hear. Ava sat there, her hands trembling around a paper cup of cold coffee, eyes fixed on the man lying motionless in the bed. The monitors hummed softly, lines of green light drawing fragile rhythms of life. Ethan Cole, the man the world once called untouchable, brilliant, ruthless, now couldn't even lift his own hand. Outside the glass, the city glowed in the distance, full of noise and color. Inside this room, time stood still. The nurse adjusted his blanket and gave Ava a soft look, one of those looks that carried more pity than words ever could. "He's stable," she whispered, "but no promises yet." Ava nodded, her throat tight. Stable, what a cruel word. Stable was the space between living and dying. She leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You don't even know me," she murmured, her voice cracking. "And yet here I am, pretending to be your wife." It wasn't a lie exactly, just a deal. A contract signed in silence and ink, meant to protect his empire while he healed, if he ever would. But as she watched him breathe, the paper between them felt like glass, thin, fragile, and ready to shatter. For the first time in years, Ava didn't feel like running. "Before we dive deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me how far a single story can travel. Drop your city. Let's see how wide kindness still spreads." The story began 6 months earlier, on a night that didn't smell like love. It smelled like desperation and rain-soaked pavement. Ava stood beneath a broken streetlight, clutching a folder that held her last chance. Inside were photograph, hospital bills, and a resignation letter that had never been signed. Her brother's illness had drained everything: savings, sanity, hope. Then came the offer. "Marry me," Ethan had said, his tone colder than the marble floors of his penthouse. "You'll get everything you need. I'll get what I need, a wife the boy can trust. It's business, not romance." Ava had laughed, but not the happy kind. The kind that sounded like someone giving up. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," he'd replied, sliding a pen across the table. "You'll play the part. That's all that matters." She should have walked away. But when you've got nothing left, even a bad deal can look like salvation. Their wedding was small, quick, and painfully quiet. A photographer, 2 witnesses, and no smiles. The diamond sparkled under the city lights, but Ava felt its weight like a shackle. Still, something about him didn't fit the rumors. The tabloids painted Ethan as a man made of ice, but she'd seen flickers of warmth when no one else was looking. The way his voice softened when he spoke to his housekeeper. The small pauses before saying something cruel, as if he was tired of playing the villain. Then came the accident. A single phone call at dawn. A crash. A chair. A lifetime change. Now, in this sterile room filled with beeping machines, Ava realized that the man who'd offered her a contract was no longer the one lying before her. She wasn't sure when she started talking to him like he could hear, maybe because silence was heavier than his indifference ever was. "Ethan," she whispered, "you once told me emotions were a weakness. Maybe that's why life took yours away. Maybe it's trying to teach you something." She stayed even when she didn't have to. Signed forms, argued with doctors, sat through endless nights when the world forgot about him. And maybe, just maybe, that was when love began, in the quiet spaces between duty and heartbreak. But Ava didn't know that someone else had been watching her, and soon her kindness would become both her salvation and her curse. The first sign of movement came one early morning when the sun broke through the blinds and scattered light across the sterile white walls. Ava had fallen asleep in the chair again, her head resting near his arm, when she heard a sound, faint, uncertain, his fingers twitching against the blanket. Her breath caught. "Ethan," she whispered, barely daring to believe it. Nothing. Just a rhythmic beep of the monitors, steady as ever. Maybe it was her imagination. But then his eyelids fluttered, slow and heavy, as if fighting through a fog that had held him prisoner for months. She jumped up, pressing the nurse's button with shaking fingers. He moved. His waking up. The next few hours blurred, doctors rushing in, quiet commands, tests, more waiting. When the chaos finally settled, Ava stood by his side again. His eyes were open now, glassy and lost, but open. "Where?" His voice was rough, broken, unfamiliar. "Where am I?" In the hospital, Ava said softly, "You had an accident, but you're okay now." He turned his head slowly, wincing at the effort. "And you are?" Ava hesitated, the truth catching in her throat. Then she said it. "Your wife." His gaze fixed on her, confusion dark and sharp in his tired eyes. "My wife." He tried to laugh, but it came out like a cough. "I don't remember." "You don't have to right now," she whispered, squeezing his hand gently. "Just rest." But when she walked out into the hallway, her own hands trembled. The truth was heavier now. He didn't remember the contract, didn't remember the deal that bound them together. To him, she wasn't a stranger pretending. She was his wife. And for reasons she couldn't name, she didn't correct him. The days that followed were filled with the quiet rebirth of a man once feared by everyone around him. Rehabilitation sessions, physical therapy, endless frustration. The Ethan she'd known, the cold, calculating CEO, was replaced by a man stripped down to his most human parts: pain, confusion, humility. Once, during therapy, when his body refused to cooperate, he had thrown a cup across the room, his voice hoarse with fury. "I built empires with these hands," he'd shouted, tears threatening to break through. "Now I can't even lift a pen." Ava had knelt beside him, picking up the shards of porcelain. "Empires can fall, Ethan," she'd said softly, "but people can stand again." He looked at her for a long moment, something unfamiliar flickering behind his tired eyes. "You talk like you believe that." "I have to," she murmured, "or I'd have given up a long time ago." And in that moment, something shifted, not in his muscles, but in his heart. That night, when she returned home, Ava found herself smiling faintly for the first time in months. Maybe it was because he'd smiled at her before she left. Maybe it was because he'd said her name like it meant something. But she didn't tell anyone. Some feelings are too fragile to name. The next morning, a nurse stopped her in the hallway. "He's been asking for you," she said. "Didn't want breakfast till you came." Ava's chest tightened. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. If you were there in that moment, what would you have done? Be honest. Comment your answer below. And if words fail you, just hit like to prove that compassion still matters. Weeks passed, and Ethan began to recover fragments of strength. But the memories, the deal, the cold proposal, the life before, remained buried somewhere he couldn't reach. Every day, Ava helped him learn to live again, feeding him, reading to him, even laughing with him when he made sarcastic jokes about his useless legs. Their world became a small, strange universe where pain and warmth coexisted. One evening, as she adjusted his blanket, Ethan looked up at her with quiet curiosity. "Ava," he said slowly, "before the accident, was I a good husband?" Her heart froze. She wanted to lie, to give him comfort, but the truth trembled on her lips, dangerous and sharp. "You were..." She hesitated, eyes burning. "You were someone trying to learn how." He smiled faintly, a sad, almost broken smile. "Then maybe now I'll get it right." And for the first time, Ava believed he might. The sun had become their silent witness. Every morning, it spilled through the hospital blinds, painting both of them in a warmth neither expected to deserve. Ethan began to move his hands with more precision, his words returning stronger, steadier, but his legs remained silent, two stubborn reminders of how fragile power could be. Ava noticed the little things, how he flinched when doctors talk about permanent damage, how his jaw clenched when someone held the door open for him. Pride was still in him, sharp as ever, but softer now, like a blade dulled by sorrow. One afternoon, as rain whispered against the glass again, Ethan stared out the window, his reflection merging with the storm. "You know," he said quietly, "before the accident, people feared me. Even I feared me." Ava looked up from the chair, where she'd been folding a towel. "Feared you?" He nodded. "When you live too long in control, you start mistaking it for love." He turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. "I must have been awful to you." Her breath hitched. There it was, the question she'd avoided since the day he woke up. "You weren't awful," she said softly. "You were lost." Ethan exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a confession. Then maybe this is my punishment. No, she replied, stepping closer. Maybe it's your chance. For a moment, silence filled the room. Not heavy, not awkward, just understanding. After that day, something shifted between them. She noticed how he started thanking the nurses, how he tried to wheel himself around instead of asking for help. There was a quiet grace to his frustration now, a humanity that the ruthless CEO never had. But Ava also noticed something else. The world outside was beginning to ask questions. The board members called, reporters probed, his family whispered. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious wife who never left his side. One afternoon, while she was helping him dress, his assistant, a Polish man named Marcus, arrived. Mr. Cole, he began stiffly. The company is under pressure. Investors need reassurance. And his eyes darted toward Ava. They're curious about your marriage. Ethan's brow furrowed. Curious how? Marcus hesitated. Some are saying it's unconventional, that it happened too suddenly. Ava felt her stomach twist. The lie they lived suddenly heavier than ever. Ethan's expression darkened. They are questioning her. Questioning everything, Marcus admitted. But if you want me to. No, Ethan interrupted sharply. Tell them my wife stays. Marcus nodded stiffly and left. Ava turned to him, heart pounding. You didn't have to do that. He looked up at her, his voice calm but certain. Yes, I did. She opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off gently. You be my anchor when I had nothing left. The least I can do is protect you now. Something in the way he said you made her chest ache. She wanted to tell him everything. The contract, the signatures, the lies. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because what if the truth broke him all over again? That night, as she tucked him in, Ethan reached for her hand. You could have left, he murmured. But you didn't. Why? Ava's eyes glistened. Because maybe I was lost too. And when his fingers brushed haze, something electric passed between them. Not desire, not pity, but recognition. Two broken people finally seeing each other. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Right? Yes. And tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. From that night on, their connection deepened in ways neither could explain. She read to him from old novels, her voice soft against the hum of machines. He listened, really listened, like every word she spoke mattered. But fate, cool as ever, was not done with them, because buried deep within Ethan's recovering mind was a memory, a flash of the night they first met, a cold table, a signature, and her trembling hand. It flickered faintly in his dreams, like a movie reel trying to play through static. And soon, those memories would begin to surface, piece by painful piece, threatening to tear apart the fragile love they were finally learning to build. The night maze came first. Fragments. The scrape of a chair, a woman's hesitant voice, a contract sliding across polished wood. Ethan would wake with a gasp, drenched in sweat, clutching at his useless legs as if he could hold the truth still before it slipped away. Ava would rush to his side, wiping his forehead, whispering calm into his shaking hands. It's just a dream, she'd murmur, though she knew it wasn't. But dreams are cruel. They don't lie. They just wait. One morning, while she adjusted his wheelchair by the window, he asked it, quiet, almost too calm. Ava, were we happy before? Her fingers froze on the metal handle. What do you mean? I keep seeing papers. Your name. My signature. Was it a contract? The word hung there like smoke. Ava turned slowly, her heart crashing against her ribs. Ethan, you've been dreaming. The medicine. I wasn't dreaming, he said, voice low but certain. It felt real. The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, car horns and birdsong faded into a single hum. Inside, only their breaths filled the space between them. Ava's throat tightened. Ethan, please, don't push yourself. You're healing. He looked at her for a long time, eyes narrowing as if trying to read the truth through her trembling lips. Then he nodded. All right, he whispered. Healing. But that night, when she thought he was asleep, Ethan reached for his phone. His fingers barely worked, but determination as a way of overcoming pain. He opened old messages, scrolled through photographs, and found one. A picture of their wedding day. Her smile looked forced. His hand was barely touching hers. And beside it, an email marriage contract agreement. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. By morning, something inside him had changed. He spoke less, smiled rarely. When she brought breakfast, he thanked her with words but not with eyes. The warmth that had begun to bloom between them turned brittle. Finally, on the third day, he said it. So it was true. Ava froze by the doorway, tray trembling in her hands. What was true? The deal. His voice was steady, almost too steady. The fake marriage. The contract that bought your loyalty. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I wanted to believe it wasn't, he continued, his tone breaking at the edges. That maybe what I felt now was something real. But I should have known everything in my life has a price. Ava's eyes filled, but she didn't run. Not this time. It started as a deal, she whispered, stepping closer. Yes, I needed the money, but it didn't stay that way. He looked up sharply, eyes burning with hurt and disbelief. And what am I supposed to do with that? Ava, believe that love grew out of lies. She took a shaky breath. Maybe that's the only place love can grow, from the ruins. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sound of rain filled the room again, the same rain that had followed them since the beginning. Then Ethan turned away, his shoulders trembling. Leave me. Ava didn't argue. She just whispered, I'm sorry, and walked out, quietly, like a ghost leaving her own story. But as the door clicked shut behind her, Ethan's tears finally fell. Not for the lie, but for the truth hiding beneath it, that he'd fallen in love with her, not in spite of the deception, but because she stayed when no one else would. Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight. The next few days passed like winter. The hospital felt colder, emptier without her voice filling the corners of his room. Nurses came and went, but no one said her name. Ethan threw himself into rehab with a vengeance. Every stretch, every painful push was a rebellion against the helplessness he felt. The doctors said he was improving faster than expected, but inside, he felt hollow. Sometimes, he'd catch a glimpse of her through the hallway glass, signing discharge papers for her brother, her face pale from sleepless nights. She never looked his way. One evening, as he practiced gripping a pen, his therapist smiled. You're doing better than most, Mr. Cole. You might walk again someday. He stared at the pen in his hand. Someday, he whispered, if I can learn how to stand for something that isn't built on power or pity. And though he didn't know it yet, that someday would arrive sooner and more painfully than either of them could imagine. Ava didn't return to Ethan's room for almost 2 weeks. She told herself it was better this way, that space would heal what honesty had broken. But every night, as she lay awake listening to the faint hum of hospital light from across the street, she wondered if he was still awake too, staring at the same ceiling, drowning in the same silence. Her brother, Daniel, was getting better. His treatments were finally working, and soon they'd be able to go home. She should have been relieved. But every time she thought about leaving, a sharp ache bloomed beneath her ribs. One evening, as she packed Daniel's bag, he looked up from his bed. You haven't gone to see him, have you? Ava froze. Who? Ethan. His voice was soft, too knowing for his young age. You keep looking at the hospital every night like he's waiting for you. She swallowed. His not. He found out the truth. Daniel's brow furrowed. Did you love him before or after the lie? Her eyes glistened. After. Only after. Daniel smiled faintly, a fragile kind of wisdom in his voice. Then it wasn't fake, Ava. It just started in the wrong place. That night, she couldn't sleep. So she went back, not because she was ready, but because she couldn't not. The hospital hallway was quiet when she arrived. She expected to find Ethan sleeping or refusing to see her. Instead, she found his room empty. The bed stripped. The machines gone. Her heart lurched. Where is he? She asked the nurse at the desk. The woman smiled kindly. He was discharged this morning. Said he wanted to continue therapy at home. Ava stood there, her world spinning. Discharge. Gone. Without a word. She walked out into the cold night, her breath fogging in the air. Somewhere across the city, in the tall glass tower that once felt like a cage, Ethan was learning to live again. Without her. At that same moment, Ethan sat in his wheelchair by the window of his penthouse. The city lights blinked below, distant and indifferent. He'd moved back into the world he used to own, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Marcus had arranged everything. Nurses, therapists, even investors who came to congratulate him on his recovery. But the only voice he wanted to hear was the one that wouldn't come back. On the table beside him lay a small white envelope. Her handwriting. He'd found it tucked inside his hospital drawer the day he left. He hadn't opened it yet. He picked it up now, turning it between his fingers, feeling the faint trace of her perfume on the paper. Finally, he tore it open. Inside were only a few words written in her trembling hand. You taught me that love isn't a contract. It's a choice. I hope you choose to live again. A tear fell onto the page before he could stop it. For a man who once signed billion-dollar deals without blinking, a few sentences from her felt heavier than all of them combined. He pressed the letter against his chest. You really think I can't love you like this? He whispered to the empty room. You have no idea. If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart hash. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. Weeks passed, and Ethan worked harder than ever. Every morning, he pushed his chair down the long glass hallway of his penthouse, practicing his grip on the wheels, learning balance, relearning movement. The doctors said he might walk again in a year, maybe more, but he didn't care about timelines anymore. He started rebuilding his company differently. Kinda. Slower. The man who once measured worth by profit now measured it by faces. The janitor who smiled, the assistant who dared to joke, the employees who stayed late not out of fear but respect. But loneliness still sat beside him, uninvited and constant. He would catch himself looking at the empty chair across the table, where she used to sit feeding him soup, laughing softly when he made fun of hospital food. Sometimes he imagined what he'd say if he saw her again. Sometimes he practiced it aloud, voice shaking between pride and longing. I don't care how it began, he'd whisper into the night. I just want to finish it right. What he didn't know was that Ava was closer than he thought. And fate, ever watchful, ever cruel, was already writing the chapter that would bring them face to face again, not in love, but in crisis. It happened on a Thursday. Ava was leaving the clinic with Daniel when the commotion began, flashing lights, reporters, security shouting near the main road. She didn't care at first, not until she heard his name ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. Mr. Cole's car. Wheelchair tipped. He was helping a child. Her heart stopped. She pushed through the sea of voices until she saw the scene. His car half on the curb, his wheelchair overturned, a small boy crying beside him. Ethan's body lay twisted on the pavement, a dark scrape across his temple, his hand still outstretched toward the child he'd shoved out of the way. Ava dropped to her knees beside him, trembling. Ethan, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, dazed, unfocused. Ava. She bit back a sob. I'm here. Don't move. He smiled weakly. Didn't think you'd still come when I fell. Don't talk like that, she pleaded, her tears spilling now. You saved him. You're going to be okay. But the medics pulled her back as they lifted him onto the stretcher. She followed the ambulance all the way to the hospital, the same one where their story had begun, where it had broken, where it would now be rewritten in blood and hope. Hours later, the doctor stepped out, exhaustion etched into his face. He's alive, he said. A concussion, fractured ribs, but no spinal damage. He'll recover. Ava pressed her hand to her face, shaking with relief. Can I see him? The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Inside the room, the smell of antiseptic and memory hit her like a wave. He lay there, pale but breathing, the same machines humming beside him. She walked closer and sat down, her fingers finding his hand like they'd never forgotten the way. When his eyes opened again, the first thing he whispered wasn't her name. It was, Why? Why what? She asked softly. Why are you here? Ava's lips quivered. Because I never stopped caring. Even when I wanted to. He studied her face, pain and disbelief warring in his gaze. After everything, after what you did. She nodded. I lied. Yes, I took your deal. But everything after that was real. Ethan, you have to believe me. He turned his face away. Belief doesn't erase betrayal. Her tears fell quietly. No, but maybe forgiveness does. The word hung there, fragile as a breath between them. Be honest, she whispered, voice trembling. Could you forgive me after what I did? He closed his eyes, the struggle carved into every line of his face. I don't know, he said finally, but I want to try. Ava's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and for the first time since the accident, she smiled through them. Then that's enough. Be honest. Could you forgive after what they did? Type forgive if you could, or never if it would break you too deeply. Days passed quietly after that. She stayed again, not as his nurse, not as his fake wife, just as Ava. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. She would read by his bed, and he would listen, both of them pretending that the silence meant healing instead of fear. One morning, she found him sitting by the window, the sunlight turning his eyes almost golden. You know, he said softly, I used to believe love was a transaction, that everyone wanted something in return. Ava smiled faintly. And now? He turned toward her. Now I think love is when you stay, even when it hurts. She didn't answer. She just stepped closer, her fingers brushing his shoulder, a touch that felt like both apology and promise. That evening, when she wheeled him through the hospital garden, autumn leaves drifted around them like confetti from a world they had survived. Ethan looked at her and said quietly, You really think I can't love you like this? Ava froze, the words striking her like thunder. He smiled, weak but real. Because I do. I loved you when I couldn't stand. I loved you when I remembered the lie. And I love you now, not in spite of what we were, but because you never ran. Tears filled her eyes, and before she could answer, he reached for her hand. But love isn't pity. If you want to go, I'll understand. She shook her head, whispering through tears, I already went once. I won't make that mistake again. For the first time, Ethan laughed, soft, broken, alive. Then maybe we both learned how to love after all. Winter melted into spring, and the world seemed to move slower, as if time itself wanted to give them a chance to breathe. Ethan's therapy sessions moved from the hospital to his home, and every morning Ava was there. Sometimes she cooked breakfast. Sometimes she just sat by the window while he struggled through his exercises, cheering softly when he managed a single step. Each step looked small to anyone else, but to Ava, they were miracles in motion. One afternoon, after a long session, Ethan slumped back into his chair, exhausted but smiling. You know, he said between breaths, I used to measure success by the height of the buildings I owned. Now, it's by how long I can stand without falling. Ava knelt in front of him, her eyes glistening. Then you're the most successful man I know. He chuckled, the sound low and warm. Careful, you'll make me believe it. You should, she whispered. You've come further than anyone ever thought you could. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, the air between them alive with quiet tenderness. I didn't come this far alone, he said. You stayed, even when you had every reason not to. She smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. We both stayed. Ethan, that's what love is, not fireworks or fairy tales. Just staying. The silence that followed was different now, full, not empty. The kind of silence that two people share when words become too small for what they feel. That evening, Ethan insisted on going out, his first time beyond the mansion walls since the accident. The sky was painted in gold and violet, the city lights flickering awake below them. He wheeled himself to the overlook by the river, Ava walking beside him. For a long time, they just watched the water move. You know, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper, I used to believe I had everything. Power, control, success. But when I lost all of it, I realized none of it could hold me when I fell. Only you did. Ava looked at him, eyes soft. You held me too, in ways you'll never even know. He turned his head, smiling faintly. Maybe that's what love is, two people learning how to hold what the world drops. The wind carried their laughter away, mingling it with the hum of the city below. For once, the world didn't feel cruel. It felt forgiving. Later that night, as she tucked the blanket around his legs, Ethan caught her hand and pressed it against his heart. "I don't want to forget this," he said softly. "Not the pain, not the healing, because without all that, I'd never have found you." Ava felt her tears rise again, but this time they didn't sting. They warmed, and I'd never have found myself. They sat like that for a long while, her hand on his heart, his gaze on the stars, both of them silent but saying everything. If you believe love still wins, comment Amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. A week later, Ethan took his first real step without the walker. It happened quietly, with no cameras, no audience. Just Ava, holding her breath, and Ethan, trembling but determined. He stood, his muscles quivering, his jaw tight, and then one shaky step forward. He laughed, a sound of disbelief and triumph all at once. "I did it." Ava rushed to him, tears spilling freely now. "You did," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. "You did." He leaned against her, his forehead resting on hers, breath uneven. "I guess I can stand now." She smiled through tears. "You always could, Ethan. You just had to believe you were worth standing for." In that fragile, golden moment, surrounded by nothing but quiet, something in both of them finally healed. For all the pain, the lies, the distance, they had found their way back, not as two halves trying to fill emptiness, but as two souls who had learned how to stay, how to forgive, and how to love again. The world felt different now, not louder, not brighter, just more alive. Months had passed since that first step, and Ethan was walking short distances with Kane. His gait was uneven, his strength still fragile, but to Ava, every motion looked like grace. The empire he once ruled through fear was now thriving under kindness. He held meetings in sunlight instead of glass towers, listened more than he spoke, and treated his people like humans, not tools. But his favorite moments weren't in boardrooms. They were the quiet ones, Ava reading on the couch beside him, Daniel dropping by with laughter that filled the house, the smell of coffee instead of antiseptic. He would watch her sometimes, not to memorize her, but to remind himself that love could exist without possession, just presence. One morning, she walked into his office with a soft smile and a little envelope. "For you," she said. He frowned playfully. "Another contract." She rolled her eyes, handing it to him. "Just open it." Inside was a small photo, the three of them, laughing in the garden, Daniel's arm around both of them. On the back, she'd written, "Family, not signed, just chosen." Ethan's throat tightened. "You're cruel," he said, blinking rapidly. "You make me cry in my own office." Ava smiled through misty eyes. "Then I'm finally doing something right." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You've been doing everything right since the day you walked into my life with that broken umbrella and that ridiculous courage." She laughed softly. "That was the day you thought I was lying." "I was wrong about a lot of things," he said, voice low, sincere. "But not about you." The afternoon light spilled across the room, catching dust motes like tiny gold stars. Ethan leaned forward slightly, the faint tremor in his hand betraying both weakness and affection. "You really think I can't love you like this?" he whispered, echoing the words that had once been a question and were now a vow. Ava's smile trembled. "No, Ethan, I think you're the only one who ever could." He pulled her gently into an embrace, not perfect, not easy, but real. The kind of embrace that said, "We made it through hell, and we're still here." Outside, the sky was turning pink, the world holding its breath between day and night. They stood there in that soft half-light, two souls who had walked through fire and learned how to hold warmth again. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind. One click can be a way of saying, "I felt you." Moral warmth. Sometimes love doesn't arrive dressed as perfection. Sometimes it comes disguised as mistakes, wrapped in pain, hidden inside second chances. It doesn't ask for promises, only for presence. Ava and Ethan's story wasn't about fairy tale romance. It was about rediscovery, of forgiveness, of humanity, of what it means to love someone not because they are flawless, but because they are trying. And in a world that often forgets tenderness, maybe that's the rarest kind of love there is.